Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On Air. I am joined today by Robert Smart. Robert is an enterprise account executive at Haiilo, and he is joining us today to have a very interesting conversation around ICP. What does ICP mean? How do we identify the right ICP? What assumptions do we make around it? Where do people go wrong? Where do people go right? And he's going to give us some or share some of his thoughts and ideas and experience on that. Firstly, Robert, welcome to the show. How are things?
Hey, Owen, thanks for having me. Yeah, we're all good today.
Good. Glad to hear it. Well, thank you for joining us. We like to give our guests a little bit of time at the beginning of the conversation before we get into topic. So we've got 2 minutes. Could you tell people that don't know you, who's Robert and who are Haiilo?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Robert or Rob or Bob or Robbie, depending on how and where you know me. Like like I imagine every other guest on the podcast, I fell into sales by absolute chance. So my goal, I left school at 16 to follow dreams of international superstardom. I had a bit of a laugh trying to make a career as a DJ. After about 10 years of that, I was still working a 9 to 5 to try and get by and do the warm-up slot. So I knocked that on the head. I don't know how it happened, but the company thought I'd be a half decent salesperson, which is probably what happens to most people. So they moved me down to Birmingham, gave me a car, told me to get a suit from TM Lewin, and 10 years later, here I am. So that's that. I started off with a bit of a hot streak, and then it cooled down. I realized I didn't have a clue what I was doing, which started the process that brought me to where I'm talking about things like ICP today. As for Haiilo, I'm going to try not to throw jargon at you. We hear the words employee engagement, employee advocacy. The long and short of it is that the world we live in now, most people or most companies have an element that's remote. People are siloed. People aren't as engaged. People are not communicating in the same way as they were. So we try to make that easier to do, to avoid people being spammed with constant emails about company activities, find the best way to get the right message through to them. And then once you've got those engaged employees, you use them to promote your brand online with employee advocacy, which is probably the least tapped digital marketing channel right now. So that's me, and that's Haiilo.
Perfect. Good timing as well. I like it. Very, very
How,
good.
how close was I to the 2 minute mark?
I don't know exactly, but I've got the time you started and time you finished, and it was 2 minutes. So it was within a minute 30 and 2 minutes 30, I reckon. I think you were pretty darn close. Trust me, I've had some people have had to cut off in the past. So talk about yourself. Go. So let's get into topic. What on earth is an ICP? Let's start there. Let's start with a really basic thing. What is ICP?
Sure. So, and this is genuine when I say this, but the first time I heard it, I genuinely thought people were talking about the insane clown posse, which will appeal to the smallest demographic out there. There was some weird American hip hop group that dressed up as clowns. It is not. It is not that. It is your ideal client profile, and basically, you do not have a sales team big enough to not be targeting your ideal client profile. If you're going scattergun at everyone, then you are probably wasting an awful lot of time going after people that, with a tiny little bit of research, you'd figure out they never should have been in your prospect list or pipeline in the first place. So, so yeah, it's ideal client profile. So when we use that, forgive the jargon, that's ICP.
And I want to just unpick this word ideal for a second. Your opinion would be really interesting because
Okay.
we maybe have 50, 60 active clients at any one time, 100, 150 clients that have worked with us over the years. And I would say many of them are not ideal. Some are, but not all of them. And I guess my question is, what does ideal mean? Because ideal to me in its definition means perfect, but are any clients perfect? Is there such a thing as an ideal client out there?
I don't know if we're about to get into the philosophy of the word ideal in and of itself. I don't know, that's a really good point. I think the reality is, that there is no Shangri-La, and there's always going to be an element of compromise.
Yeah.
With this, I kind of see it as an iterative process. So I don't think you ever fully arrive at the ICP. It should be a constantly moving and evolving thing. There should always be an element of experimentation. And there's probably going to be times, in fact, there will definitely be times when, you've got a really good grasp of what that is, and you're speaking to someone and they go with a competitor. And by the same token, there's going to be people who you go, that is not a fit, and they surprise you and they sign. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a bit of a broad look at this, but again, the goal is to chip away at the stuff that is clearly not suited and clearly not a good use of time, to make the best use of your time, the best return on your prospect and marketing, and ultimately build the pipelines, the client lists that are really suited as best they can be to your business.
It's interesting, isn't it? So the reason I asked that question is because I think we need an industry change around using the term ICP. I think it should be ACP. What's an acceptable client profile? Because realistically, if we're, and I think when you think about it, a lot of founders starting a SaaS business, let's say, they hear the experts talk about ideal client profile. And what do? They go, our ideal client is Capita, is Barclays, is HSBC, whoever it might be, these big enterprise organizations. And what we actually need is people learning to step through the sales process in mid-market or small business and earning the right to go and sell to enterprise a lot of the time. And they waste a lot of time, energy, and money trying to sell to people who've got 18-month, 2-year sales cycles where they've got no validity going in and selling to them, no proof of concept working with competitors or people in that market. And I think we potentially as an industry lead people in the wrong direction by using that word ideal. And I hear it a lot when people come to us and say, well, my ideal client profile is this. Yeah, I know, but what would you want to work with? Not who's your perfect meeting, but who would you want to meet with? Who would you accept a sales meeting with that was valuable to the business? And I think they're different things. What do you think?
I love it. I like it. I like acceptable client profile. I think it's kind of funny because there's going to be people out there. I can think of a certain Antipodean sales trainer who would not accept anything that was just acceptable. He'd have to go for gold. And I think that the goal is to get from acceptable to ideal. However, what you're talking about here, so make no mistake, when I'm talking about ICP, I'm not just saying, right, so I want to sell to Google, I want to sell to Salesforce, and I want to sell to Meta. That is a wish list. That is, that's not really what we're talking about. When we talk about the client profile, I'm talking more about like demographics. Is that the word? Psychographics, general functions and aspects of the business that you can then use to find other prospects that match it.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, I'm a tech company, we want to be selling to Facebook, HubSpot, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So the journey is from acceptable to ideal. Maybe that's a way of looking at it.
Yeah, I love that. I like throwing these in there, these little curveballs. It just gets people thinking about how that phraseology can really impact on strategic thinking in an early stage business that maybe doesn't have the sales experience or the go-to-market experience. And your point is you're coming with all these learnings, right? You refine and it's iterative. If you haven't got the advantage of having done it before, then you don't have that iterative piece informing you. So it's just an interesting point for people out there as they grow their business and they go to market, thinking about, not every customer has to be a 10 out of 10. But it's okay to go for people that might spend less than your average at early stage, particularly. Let's move on. So just thinking about ICP, and we'll stick with ICP for continuity. What are the things that you're thinking about that maybe define what's in your ICP? What are the elements or the categories or the things that you're considering to try and document it and define it?
So for a lot of people, and myself included, there's going to be headline demographics that are you know, in a lot of cases, your territory, you join a business and you sell into consumer goods, you sell into the EMEA market for professional services. So me, I'm looking at the size of the organization. I'm looking at the location of the headquarters for the ICP, but then also I will, I will look at employees who are global. So I want to sell to a headquarter in a certain location, and I'll look at vertical. And that's a pretty good starting point for most people. So I've got a good idea, for us, less than 1,000 people isn't really a brilliant match for us. But they tend to be fairly quick at coming to like the conclusion. When it comes to verticals, I know there are certain verticals whereby, so let's say they have distributed workforces, they have a mix of field and office-based staff, they have lots of different offices, they've got flexible workers. Those are perfect for us because they face the typical pains that we solve. So with that, yeah, headline stuff like size of business, headquarter location, and vertical is normally a pretty good start.
Are there other things that are maybe more niche that you've used to refine? So I'm thinking, I don't know, things like events. They do a big hiring round, and I'm hypothesizing based on what you do. I don't know the answers, but they get funding, they hire lots of people. There are redundancies, there can be things that can happen in a business that define what they need, what the trigger points are, what's the narrative around the boardroom table at the moment. Do there things that give you a better chance of winning a client or make it more relevant from a timing perspective, maybe, that you can look for?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So that is, I believe that the sort of intent data, that's kind of, there are lots of filters on things like LinkedIn or Cognism or, other prospecting tools are available that allow you to filter for that. I'm going to say yes, but so you could run around like a busy fool chasing after every little trigger. They've had new funding, they've got a new CXO, they've grown by X%. So what's really important, and this we'll probably come round to, is that the sort of thesis point is that whatever you do, you log to the best of your ability, because it sounds really boring. You try and keep a track of what it is specifically you're going after, and you try and keep a track of the results. So that rather than going hard on 100 companies where you go across, 10 sort of key stakeholders, and that could take, a month or two to do properly. Rather than do that, you do 25 with small tweaks, small iterations. And that's how you start to get slightly closer to the things that do work and the things that don't.
Interesting, isn't it? Because I think I've seen a lot of organizations, I mean, you may have seen this, or you may have had this experience, that will identify an ICP, they'll have a plan, and a sales opportunity will come inbound from wherever, organically through marketing or referral, that can knock them off path. Sometimes that can be a great thing because all of a sudden you go, oh, we hadn't thought about that market. They've identified that they consistently have challenges that we can solve, and we'd not thought about that. Great. Other times they can be the exception in their industry, and you can go on a wild goose chase trying to talk to all other people that look like that, and all of a sudden you realize, geez, there's a difference between ICP and somebody that can buy from me. Have you ever seen anything like that? I guess there's a weight to staying on plan, but also a weight to exploring things that come at you sometimes.
It's funny you bring this example up. My first ever sale fell into this category. So this is my first sort of B2B sale going way back when. And it was I was on a ramp target, and it put me to something like 300 or 400% of target today. So I thought it was brilliant. And this prospect appeared, and within a week it was signed. I think we actually did the deal on a Saturday. So my first, imagine, younger, less experienced version of me, my first B2B sale, and I think this is what it's like, closing deals on a Saturday, people come in, they turn around in a week. And the person then went on to never use the platform, they churned. And I think we probably had troubles getting money out of them after it was done. So, but I had seen that, I had been sort of bitten, and I just went, right, okay, here's a whole field of opportunity. We don't normally sell to these people. I'm the only one who's doing that. I'm going to get a run on this. I'm going to be doing so well, and I wasted all this time trying to match this prospect. So everything. Is it Mark Robert? Someone was talking about, I think the guy from HubSpot. He talked about a series of small experiments.
Yeah.
And I would go for that. You know, I absolutely should have gone after 10 companies like that just to check it out. But I didn't need to spend, you know, literally a year trying to recreate that first sale. So small experiments, when you get something that surprises you, whether it's good or bad, try, see what's going on, but don't be pot committed until you're absolutely sure it's worth driving in for.
Talk to me about segmentation. So in your ICB, you've talked about size, location, vertical, and there may be some trigger events. You wouldn't necessarily go chasing based on that, but that can make it better or worse, timing or whatever it might be. I'm guessing vertical wise, there's some kind of breadth to that. So it's not one vertical, we only sell to one vertical. There'll be multiple verticals in there. I'm guessing size wise, you said above 1,000, but above 1,000 could mean 1,000, or it could be, you know, it could be 300,000 depending on who you're talking to. And I guess my question is, how do you approach that when you've got a broad ICP, either at the beginning or just because your product relates to a lot of places? How do you approach that from a targeting perspective?
So with this, let me think. I think that we could talk about LinkedIn filters, and I'm conscious that that probably wouldn't add too much value to your listeners here, because I don't want to educate people on how to use a LinkedIn. I think all that stuff's super valuable. Here's what's important. We sort of talked about a thesis at the start, and the thesis is, I think I need to sell to this kind of business, right? So that could be a Capita, it could be the BBC. That needs to come from somewhere. So you start off broad. It could be a startup, it could be a new rep joining an established business, or maybe you're a business that has done really well of product-led growth or inbound, and right now you're hearing the sky is falling and you need to start getting to grips with this outbound thing, right? So let's start off with, you have nothing. Let's say you are brand new, you haven't done a deal, and you've built a product, or you've got a service. Your best bet is to go and analyze the customers of companies you think you are like. Okay, so down that route, most of them will have this on their website. LinkedIn now shows it on some companies' pages. I don't know how long that'll last, but you can look at your competitor and see their key clients. So I would go down that route. I would avoid the Googles and Salesforces and Capitas, ironically, right? They're the vanity logos. They are so big that they probably buy lots and lots of software. They trial lots of things out. They do lots of sweetheart deals where people bend over backwards to say they've sold to Salesforce. Find the real ones, okay? If you can get case studies, even better, and then go and look at them and their attributes and come up with your thesis. So there's your thesis to begin with. If I was stupid enough to take on Air Marketing, who are probably my favorite business in this space, then I would go and look at the clients similar to yours, and then I wouldn't go and poach them. What I would do is I would look at their location, I'd look at their size, I'd look at their offerings. I'd start to get a feel for what that business was like. So the profile of that business, if you like. So once you've got that, you've got, you know, hopefully at least 5 businesses to start off with. That's your rough thesis. You know, I sell the ideal clients between 50 and 300 people. They have headquarters in the UK, but maybe operate overseas as well. They are in this industry, and then you go at it. Pause for a moment, but here's where it starts to get tricky. At this point, you've got probably a couple of thousand. So what you then need to do, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is you have a couple of different permutations. So if you've got a list of 1,000, I don't know how many reps, you know, that would maybe take 10 reps, a couple of months to go through. I don't know. That's a long time to find out that it doesn't work. So
Yeah.
start splitting them out if you can. So we know we've got the UK, we've got the Nordics, we've got Benelux, we've got Iberia. That's pretty easy to do. Then you can start doing, okay, we've got government organizations, we've got listed companies, we've got retail chains, we've got all of that. And then you can start to even look at the services they offer. Are they blue collar? Are they white collar? Are they the sort of place that has lots of high paid employees? Are they sort of place where there's huge disparity between the bottom and the top? All of that. Try come up with as many different theses as you got. And then what you'll probably have is about 10, maybe 20 different lists.
And how long do you give? Maybe let me just think about how I've structured this question. So I've got my thesis, I've got a number of lists I've segmented into whatever categories we think are the right ones, because we don't want to go all in and mix them up and get confused. What are you looking for, and how quickly do you think you can find it to either A, validate your thesis that this is a market that's worth investing time and energy into and money, or B, yeah, I've learned what I need to learn. I am not going to be effective here if I could be over here making faster progress.
Tough one. So it depends on how quick you can get through them. And by that, I don't just mean, send a load of sort of cadences out on auto. You still need to be speaking to them, because that's where the real research lies.
Yeah.
Interacting with them. So how quickly you can get through that, how confident you are that you know your message you're offering, your value prop, because if you're still trying to figure that out and you're still trying to figure out the ICP, it's even harder. And then also how good your salespeople are plays a part, but also how well they know the industry, the value prop as well. So it can take a long time, and it can be like a Sisyphean task that keeps you busy for the entirety of your career. But once you've spoken and had conversations with, let's say, 25 people in a specific tranche, you've probably got a good enough idea of they don't face the problems that we purport to fix. They don't have the structure that would allow this in place. They already have this kind of thing in place. You need to take that feedback and record it. But yeah, 25, I would say, is probably enough for you to get a bit of a steer on it. You're not going to know absolutely, but you'll know whether it's so bad that you cut and run and ditch it. And if it's no good, if it's showing nothing, then at an early stage, there's so much to go at that you shouldn't need to be hammering it.
And I guess that's where data comes into play, right? And I'm sure you'd agree with this, that you've got to be, I think you said about, tracking it earlier, you've got to be managing the data behind it and tracking it and have the metrics, because otherwise you go on gut feel, don't you? You go on, how does it feel? What are people saying? But the data will give you the facts. And I think that's where having a CRM, putting data into it, logging out all of your activity is so critical. Yet we see people ignoring that part of the process. I'm keen to throw a scenario at you, and I'd love to see how you'd respond to this. So you've identified your ICP. Inbound inquiry comes in. They're not in your ICP. They're nowhere near it, but they're making some good noises. What do you do?
Well, I would probably just answer it as normal. One of I had a really in-depth conversation with our BDRs about this last week. I think it's really, and I'm maybe going off topic, I think it's really important to give the best buying experience possible. I'm not suggesting that you move heaven and earth to give them everything they need. And the good buying experience doesn't mean the traditional sort of pandering, over the top attempts at building rapport. But we salespeople have a bit of a bad name anyway, so it's probably good karma to start to undo that work. But if you can find out what triggered them to speak to you and maybe build a bit of goodwill, then it'll probably help you at some point down the line, even if it doesn't help today.
I'm guessing, it's true to say that small accounts turn into big accounts sometimes as well. So, winning people that might not be your ideal client, but are a client that pay the bill on time, that use the service, that become advocates, that refer in, that are growing and taking on more people. can be a very good business decision, and there's an arrogance sometimes in sales or go to market that's like, if they don't look like this, we don't want to talk about them or talk to them. And I think there's more damage, to your point, more damage that can be done from a reputation perspective in that. And I think this comes back to a point that I thought when you first started talking about this, which is that we're looking for somebody that doesn't necessarily just look the way you want them to do, but who has the problem you need them to have that you can solve. And sometimes that can be identifiable by vertical, right? We know that people in that vertical have got that challenge. So people in manufacturing have got a logistics challenge at the moment. We know that, right? That's natural. People who are in, logistics and moving goods around had an extra bank holiday thrown at them the week before last. They are going to have a problem that week, right? We can see those things using logic, but there are certain things that you can't necessarily see through a vertical or through a size of organization as well, or through a location or whatever it might be. And I guess, one of the things to stop and think about would be, who's likely to have the problem that I can solve? Not what vertical are they in, but that might be vertical agnostic, but it's stage of business, people that are at Series A but yet to get to Series B, or people who are clearly advertising for new hires all the time and not filling those roles or whatever. I don't know, but there are things to look at that suggest they've got a problem. And I think sometimes that gets ignored because it's harder data to find, but actually can be very, very valid.
Yeah, you're spot on, and that should have been, probably should have raised that one earlier. I think it's probably the most important thing. With this, you can be creative though. So let's go back to like supply chain stuff, right? There are big problems. If I'm selling something in the world of logistics, that gives me a pretty wide berth. If what I sell is a bit more esoteric, something slightly harder to sell, like a lot of SaaS, to be honest, there aren't always obvious buyers for SaaS. That's where you maybe need to be a bit more creative, and start to look between the layers. With LinkedIn, one of the really cool things you can do with Sales Navigator is just look for certain words on profiles. And that's going towards individuals rather than companies, but the exercise sort of feeds the other side. So if you know that you solve certain problems around prospecting, you can put the filters in to look for people who are senior players in the C-suite who have the word prospecting on their profile. Pains. Previously, I worked at a company, if I can give them a shout out, SimilarWeb. They were known predominantly for being like a digital marketing research analytics company, and so with that, they were able to look at your website, look at the keywords driving the traffic, look at how it was comparing to another website, that sort of thing. DHL, who are one of their larger customers for the sales solution, oddly told them how to make the sales solution that they come up with. So the fable goes that a day after something like Body Power, a bodybuilding, fitness type event, they noticed huge spikes on Gymshark's website. And they were able to sort of reverse engineer the process and see, oh wow, this was before Gymshark with the Gymshark that we know today. And they were able to go, wow, it's a great prospect. And they pitched them off the back of that. That was what triggered them to reach out to them. And there's probably a whole load of other things that come into this. So if you're selling logistics solutions, or maybe e-commerce solutions, or digital advertising, or something like that, you can figure out who sucks, basically, who's growing a lot, who's getting beat by their competition. So there's lots of different ways to look at it. So if you understand your pain, you can probably do a bit of reverse engineering and figuring out where you might see those signals. But for a lot of people, that's going to be less obvious, and so the people who figure it out quickest and best are going to be the ones who win.
Yeah, and I think this conversation is really interesting to me, because I think the average company maybe says, we can sell to them, let's go and talk to them. And I think the thought that goes into it is probably one of two things: pretty quick and shallow, or it's one-off. So they might really think about it at the beginning, but to your point earlier, it's not necessarily iterative. They don't review it regularly. They're not looking at changes in the market. And you've even got to think about who's the buyer in the organization. So I've seen, go back to the pandemic, which I hate bringing up nowadays, but I'm going to because it's a great example in this case. All of a sudden, everyone wants to sell hand sanitizer and machines that clean the air and all this kind of stuff because there's a demand for it. And I get that. But who's the buyer of that? In a product that didn't exist before, who's the buyer persona in the business? So a lot of people pushed it into HR. Some people pushed it into facilities. In other places, it was whoever would pick it up and look after it, whoever cared the most. And all of a sudden, you haven't got a way necessarily of identifying your ICP without testing and getting in. So people who say, right, it is that, they're left behind because they don't look at it and measure and manage the data. And the same is true of things like we were working with an organization at the moment who sell travel management software. So people that do spend a lot of money on travel every year, corporate organizations who are sending people around the world, and they spend a lot of money, and they need a platform to manage that in one place, drive costs down, but also to keep the logistics and the organization of it really easy. Over the last 5 years, who organizes travel has changed because the structure of organization changes. And that set and forget mentality is leaving organizations behind. I think there's a couple of really good points you've made today around that iteration, review, continue to look at the data and to accept that things change as well sometimes. And, I think there's some great learnings in there. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we've maybe not talked about or I haven't asked a question on?
Maybe a little bit around so within the ideal client persona, which so far has been company based, the person, the buyer persona, if you like, right? So with that, and to your point, that is a tough one. And my theory is that over the next couple of years, where there's this tightening of belts, which hopefully won't be as bad as we're hearing, and won't be like 2008, but in any case, we've got that, and that's come off the back of probably a huge splurge in buying tech. So I think decisions are going to get pushed up the chain.
Yep.
I feel like that's going to be harder to get those people's attention, though. I think calling the C-suite is the sort of thing that huge big enterprise tech companies talk about, they advocate for. But if you're a point solution, and there's no shame in being a point solution, then you calling the CXO is not going to go down well. It's, for a start, you're going to waste too much time trying to get hold of them. So to that point, I would keep the buyer persona in the organization broad. I don't I like directors, VPs and up. I kind of don't see merit in calling lower to build a sort of groundswell, because when I've done that, that's marketing's job, and it takes a lot of time to do effectively. So directors, VPs, and then all of them. Again, with prospecting, I see it as research. And so if you do it the right way and you ask the right questions, instead of just pitching, we're Haiilo and we do this, would you like to see it? Instead, it's, hey, normally when I'm speaking to people like you, they tell me this, do you see that? That's a conversation that gets you value. You learn from it, and it also helps you to position your product in line with the pains if they face them. So that's broad, and I don't see that really I don't see that changing. I see the buying process getting more complex, but I don't see value in calling too high unless your proper strategic can prove that we change the business wholly, and don't see much value in calling too low, because with the best will in the world, people who don't have influence and authority to make the decisions, liking something isn't really going to help.
I think it's a really good point, and I think it's the Challenger research, or God knows where this research came from. I think it's Challenger, but it might have been one of the other many research organisations that seems to produce data on this kind of stuff every year. But it was saying, that in mid-market and enterprise, you've got 11 or 12 decision makers nowadays involved in a decision. Well, how do you know which one of those to start with? Because it can be different week to week, month to month. Who's got a busy week? Who hasn't? Who's going to pick it up off the back of a meeting? Oh, I'll pick that up. It's potluck work, and as long as you're in the right area, you've got to rely on a bit of luck, a bit of thesis, as you said earlier, and also that multi-stakeholder conversation. Can I have conversations with 2 or 3 people? But I absolutely agree with your point there. You go too low, and I think you're wasting time. Interesting you say it's marketing's job as well. I think that's a valid point that, you know, it's a lot of time, effort, and energy to get in and try to talk to people. You've got to try and hit the bullseye or be as close to it as possible when it comes to buyer persona. I think you've probably got a bit more flex on the type of organization, because go back to the ICP and what I called ACP earlier, like I think you're okay and something that's acceptable. Can they buy from me? Would it work for them? Yeah, let's go talk to them. But you still got to find the right person, and that's the non-compromise area for me.
Yeah, so with that, there's always and back to it, there's always an element of volume. You know, the best salespeople in the world with the most targeted prospect lists are still going to need pipelines way bigger than their targets, are still going to need prospect lists way bigger than the number of deals they need to do, because they just, you know, you'll hear no way more than you hear yes, no matter how good you are.
Absolutely. Look, Rob, we've come to the end of the conversation. Thank you so much. I want to give you just the opportunity to just give a shout out to Haiilo. So who can Haiilo help? Who should be talking to you? And how can they get in touch if they want to do that?
So Haiilo, we tend to work with communications, HR, internal recruitment, and marketing. It's kind of a broad church. We see employee advocacy, which is being a hot topic right now, is actually being more of a HR and comms issue as a marketing one, and I'll explain that in a moment. But basically, the people come to us probably because they don't get the engagement on their communications that they like. People have thousands of unread emails. Some people never check their emails. They'll spend all day on Slack or their mobile phones, but maybe not look at a platform. So the goal here is to segment out the right communications so they don't get too much, because people switch off. And secondly, it's to make sure it reaches them wherever they are. And then once you've got engaged staff, you can then get them to push out certain communications to their market. Employee engagement and employee advocacy, and that's what we're all about at Haiilo.
Love it. Fantastic. And best way to get in touch with Rob if they want to talk to you about it?
Yeah, if you want to find me on LinkedIn, it's Robert Smart UK is the handle, I think. If not, there's just a grey photo of a man folding his arms. There can't be very many of us, so reach out to me, and you can find Haiilo on haiilo.com. That is HAIILO.com, not to be confused with the Beyonce song.
I love it. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today. Really enjoyed chatting around the ICP, how we build it, the things we think about, and I hope the audience have picked up a few hints and tips and ideas. Great to chat with you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks for having me.